Morning, Fisherkids. I hope that you've had a really good week this week. I'm going to talk about hope this morning, so let's get started. Did you know that we are called to one glorious hope for the future? That's what Ephesians 4:4 tells us. So what is glorious hope? Is it just thinking positively or being optimistic? What separates Christian hope from your average, everyday, worldly hope? Well, I hopefully think that you will understand what the difference is by the end of this morning. The word hope in the Hebrew meant a couple of things. I'm not going to tell you what it meant literally because it gets confusing. But figuratively, the word hope means to be expectant. And not just, so that means to wait, but not just waiting like you wait for time to pass. It's waiting with the understanding that something good is going to happen. So it's waiting with expectant hope. It's believing that something good is going to happen. So it's not just waiting, right? It's waiting patiently, and it's waiting with the idea that something is going to happen. And it also, Christian hope means holding on to God as our hope. Christian hope doesn't look to perfect circumstances. Christian hope looks to God. Now, positive thinking, which is quite common in these days. Positive thinking is the idea that if you send enough positive energy out into the universe, eventually the universe will send you what you want back. That's kind of pie in the sky thinking, and it doesn't really have any feet to its faith. It's just kind of, I hope, True hope has a bit more substance to it than that. Optimism is looking at a bad situation and trying to find the best that you can in it. So it's looking for the best in anything. And actually, that's not a bad way to be. And there is scripture that would support that kind of thinking. Romans 8:28, for instance, says that all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. And so therefore, having an optimistic outlook is not a bad thing. But optimism is not hope. Hope doesn't concern itself with circumstances. Hope is trusting, believing, and having faith in the goodness, mercy, and love of God. Romans 4 talks a lot about Abraham and the promise that was given to him about his future and the future of his inheritance or his lineage. So God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. Romans 4:18 says, against all hope, Abraham hoped on. Now that means that despite the fact that Abraham was over 100 and his wife was over 80 and they were well past having children, even in those early days when they lived to amazing ages, he hoped on anyway. So he didn't hope in his circumstances because his circumstances were pretty grim, and anyone with half a brain would have said, well, you're not going to have kids at this point, are you? You're over 100. However, Abraham hoped on, not in his circumstances, not in his body, which the Bible actually said was decrepit. Nice. He hoped on in God. And in the promise that God had made him a promise, and he hoped in that promise because he hoped in God. He believed that God was not a man who would lie, but was one who would fulfill his promises. So Abraham believed that God would fulfill his promises because Abraham knew that God did that's how God worked. If God said something would happen, it would happen. And that was the way that Abraham believed. And so Abraham's hope was not placed in his body or Sarah's body or some miraculous anything. Abraham's hope was placed in God, and that is the main difference between Christian hope and worldly hope. Christian hope bases itself in the promises of God, whereas worldly hope just kind of hopes in hope, really. And that is where our hope as Christians needs to reside, in God himself, but not in everything turning out perfectly, but in a perfect God, right? We hope in his mercy, his justice, and his love. And we hope in a future where every tear is wiped away from every eye. There is no more pain, there is no more fear, there is no more heartache. That is our glorious hope. Our glorious hope is eternity with Christ. So I pray that this week the God of hope would fill you with all joy and peace, and that you would learn to trust in him and his character, and that's where your hope would reside. go forth this week then and be hopeful. God has never reneged on any of his promises. Jeremiah 29:11 tells us that he has plans for us, plans to give us a future and a hope. So, you have a future, you have a hope. So hope in God. And have a lovely week this week. See you later.